some of the hottest topics right now, in addition to the rooftop solar arrays that everyone's talking about. But particularly for the Philippines, country with 100 million people, they generate a lot of garbage, right? And in addition to generating garbage, they consume power, right? So this technology is all about, how do we take care of those two problems in one fell swoop. So in essence, shoot two birds with one stone. And fortunately for us, the technology's come a long way. It's not your father's incinerator anymore. Dirty, choking, dioxin-emitting device, right? So I believe, we've reached a time when the technology is here. The need has never been greater. The financing is finally available. And so it's a good time to be talking about this. And I think we can actually, 10, 20 years from now, we'll look back and say, we're here at the early days. So it's a pretty exciting time. So for the benefit of those who are joining us late, I'll just reintroduce some of the panel members who were here earlier. We've got Ed McCartin again, Senior Vice President of Synova, also co-chair of various committees on IPPF together with me. He's been in energy and power for like 2 decades, multiple continents, across industries, across sectors. Like me, he's a lawyer, converted to an energy entrepreneur. Retired, yes, okay, right. You're recovering lawyer. So great to have Ed here again. Again, we have Ruth Briones, who, in addition to being a consultant with the ADB, has a long career with NEDA, National Economic Development Authority, and is one of the pioneers in sort of a zero-point waste solution in the Philippines. So I'm sure she's excited to talk about that. And to her left, we have Albert Dalusung, who is running the Biomass Renewable Energy Alliance here in the Philippines. So Bert has like 30 years experience in biomass in this industry, and also was Director of Energy Planning, and I guess the predecessor of the DOE, right? So long career in energy, has also worked in the private sector, and was a pioneer in feed-in tariffs for the ERC. So a lot of good experience up here on stage. I hope everyone will make the most of it. And as always, we'll try to stay on schedule, but if we run over, just bear with us, and maybe afterwards we can have a few minutes for Q&A. Okay? Thank you. Good. All right, so we'll try to do this, maybe a little less formally. If folks want to go up and use the lectern, they're more than welcome. But I guess I'll just start off by throwing out a question to the audience. How many of you actually believe that waste-to-energy technology works? And that, say, if not this year, but 5 years from now, we could be supplying, 10% of the country's energy needs via garbage to electricity or garbage to syngas, et cetera. Just see a show of hands. How many people kind of agree with that idea, and how many think it's completely crazy?
How many of you are listening?
How many of you are playing with your phones?
So we got one who agreed that she's listening. How many agree on using waste to generate electricity? We got 2. It's a movement.
This is a tough crowd. Okay. Yeah. All right. So now a lot of people are probably here out of curiosity, and I think we may have a tough time convincing minds, right? Changing minds, and I think that's what we're all kind of facing individually, right, in our own business efforts, right? each of us here on the panel is also actively involved in the industry and promoting various technologies, right? So, good. Well, we got our work cut out for us. Who'd like to start off? Yep. Okay.
Okay, I have one threat to make, which is if we don't get this to be a panel about waste energy and biomass, Ruth and I are going to start singing karaoke. Now, I don't think that's going to work out well for you, so I think we do need to focus on the topic, okay? No, thank you for joining us, and it's an area, hearing that Albert has been doing this for 30 years, I was quite taken aback. I remember the first time I heard people talking about biomass when I got into it, I was like, huh? That actually works. And unfortunately, in all too many places, it works technically, but it doesn't work commercially. And so oftentimes the hardest part is basically saying, this is pretty straightforward, guys. People have been doing this for a couple 100 years. They make energy by taking crop waste. It works. But actually saying, well, no, instead, we're going to basically dig great big holes in the ground and take out that same biomass that's been down there since the dinosaurs were walking in the earth, and we're going to put that in a boiler, and we're going to burn that instead of burning the crop waste, that we don't have to do any of that work. And so it does make one say, how come something that's so basic and straightforward is something that is really viewed with such, I hate to use the word, but I will, suspicion? So I'm going to toss that to Albert, because he's been doing this longer than any of us. And of course, he also got here late. So we're going to make him answer some questions right off the top. Please.
Well, thank you. Ed, is it? By the way, I wasn't late. I was here for the previous session. I was on time.
Filipino time.
And the 30 years refers to my experience in the energy sector, not just in biomass. But I can say that probably because I worked with the precursor to the Department of Energy, there's a little anecdote that I'd like to say. During the time of Marcos, they wanted to say that they've achieved 50% indigenous energy percentage at the time. And while they started oil drilling, coal development, geothermal, didn't quite reach to 50%. We started from like 0 to say 40+%, let's say. So how do we fill that gap? Well, the sugar industry has been using bagasse for the longest time. The tobacco industry has been using firewood for the longest time. Why don't we count those? And when they counted those, it was more than 50%. So during the time of Marcos, if you look at the Philippine Energy Plan, they'd say achieve 50% indigenous energy share from local sources. Biomass was the one that made that happen. And as you say, it's old technology. It's a lot more efficient now, but it is old technology. We have a lot of experience in the country with biomass. The thing is, we've sort of forgotten that. And those that have used biomass are those that had the fuel lying around in the factory. And we want to move into a situation where there is more, let's say, a more democratic access to the biomass. And that's what I think we'd like to see, so that we can achieve that dream. What was that? 10% of the share of the power sector.
If we could hit 10%, that would be a nice target, right?
Yeah.
I think that those are very good opening comments, Bert. I agree. A big goal will be sort of the democratic aspect of it. The issue, I guess, with biomass, it's sensitive, right? Talking about food, right? And I think where a lot of these other countries have gotten hung up over the years, and probably Philippines learned from those experiences and didn't want to repeat the mistakes here. But and the U.S. is on this list as well. Making gasohol from corn had the effect of raising the price of a box of cornflakes, right? So people had, well, you know, they had slightly cheaper gas, or maybe it wasn't cheaper. Maybe they were forced to buy it in certain states like Illinois or whatever. I know I go back to Illinois and they have, you know, in Chicago they've got these little green signs on the gas pumps, right? And this fuel's made from you know, from corn, right? Soybeans, whatever, and you're sort of required to purchase a certain amount, right? Or you know, it may be more expensive, right? And then your cornflakes are more expensive, right? So then all of a sudden you've got a food problem and an energy problem, right?
I don't think we'd have that kind of problem,
Right.
though.
Exactly.
Because we're dealing with the residues after the food product has been extracted. For example, sugar, you've gotten the juice out of the cane, the bagasse is now your fuel. Rice husk, you've gotten the grain, and the husk is now your fuel. So I think for many of the companies that are members of Biomass Alliance, we're taking the residues that would have been dumped, burned, stored
Been
somewhere.
waste anyway, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
One man's trash is another man's treasure, right?
Yeah.
No, totally agree. And I think that's why, you know, the industry probably suffered, you know, from some bad publicity and whatnot, you know, and the technology that I'm involved in, gasification, I mean, you know, people look at that and they say, well, is that an incinerator? And what happens with the dioxins and, you know, kids born with birth defects and all, you know, right? Of course, we've come a long way from that, right? And I think, you know, it's an important distinction. That's why I raise it now to say, so that what we're talking about here is not, you know, sort of leveling the rainforest to plant palm trees and then, you know, use that to create energy, right? I mean, that's happening in some of our neighboring countries and is a very sensitive issue, right? So particularly also for biodiversity, right? Not just the, you know, not just the food angle. Good. Ruth, you want to?
Okay, good afternoon again. I'm talking here of something, provide data. There are 100 million Filipinos generating about 70 kilogram of waste a day. Out of the 100 million Filipinos, we have 70,000 tons of waste daily, municipal solid waste. In Metro Manila, we have 14,000 tons a day of generated municipal solid waste. We technology people have computed the energy that will be generated from that. There will be about 200, almost 150 megawatt nationwide. That is generated power from energy from municipal solid waste. We started this project. I started this project 2008. Actually, I was one of the framers of Ecological Waste Management Act and the Cleaner Act. I was with the DNR. So when we were doing the Ecological Waste Management Act, we are looking already of the possibility of generating energy from the waste. Now, we started from scratch. We look at technologies. The Philippines was then not ready to accept technologies for energy from waste. People here doesn't want to listen about waste to energy because we always relate to waste. When you say waste to energy, you relate that to incineration. So the Cleaner Act is not even prohibiting clean incinerator. Because according to some environmental advocates, incinerators are not really allowed in the Philippines. But there was the first waste to energy supposed to be established or constructed in Payatas in 2000, year 2000, under Estrada administration, but it was not pushed through because there were issues that were raised and until to the Supreme Court because accordingly, Supreme Court said, accordingly, advocates that does not provide, does not allow for the use of incineration or waste to energy in the Philippines. So, but the Supreme Court ruled in 2004 that incineration is not really prohibited because the law does not provide prohibition. John Com case, Republic of the Philippines. So it says there is no prohibition on incinerators. So we went forward in 2008, but then they still stop us. Advocates stop us. That's why I was with Ed in 2010, but we were wasting a lot of waste until now. And we tried our Now we don't want to use the word waste to energy anymore. Working with the Ecological Waste Management Commission, we are now using energy from waste, EFW, and integrating material recovery facility, because that's the law provide. Now, with almost 200 megawatt ready, including the agricultural waste, we are wasting a lot of waste. So, and even we are making representation with the DOE about why not redefine biodegradable also feedstock when it comes to biomass waste. The policy provides that biomass must only generate biomass waste to energy must only generate from biodegradable waste. Nabubulok, organic waste. So you have to remove the plastic, you have to remove the rubber ties, you have to remove the. So we are going to bring a feedstock to the boiler, or say anaerobic digester or fermentation. Only those can be dissolved by an ordinary chemical called digester, or an ordinary boiler system that will not emit toxic fumes, or you are not allowed to burn openly. So that's the history of the energy from waste. And for the information of everybody, together with Synova, we were subject of rallies and a lot of petition. Even went to the United Nations. We got a project registered under the UNFCCC, but we were not allowed. For energy from waste, we'll be needing security of feedstock, of course, and the number one issue also is politics. Politics. Who controls the municipal solid waste? It's the government.
I'd like to thank Ruth for her comments there. I think it's important for the government to have a very open definition, if you will, of what biomass and waste to energy technologies that are acceptable are. Because biomass just happens to be the only renewable energy source of energy that what power planners would call baseload and dispatchable. You know? No other. None of the solar, wind, even hydro can be dispatched. Biomass can. In a way that's the only kind of renewable energy that you have sort of control of, enabling you to match the requirements of the market. So I think we need to have a very open definition of what that biomass. I wouldn't even ask, Ruth, the DOE to change, because that's not in the law. There's no distinction in the law between waste to energy, biodegradable, there is no distinction in the law. If you ask DOE to change, there will be a distinction in the IRR. We don't want that. I think what we want is for the DOE to continue to include waste to energy, biomass, under biomass, eligible for the feed-in tariff for biomass, eligible for all the benefits under the RE Act for biomass. Of course, I have to report that in the NREB, I sit in the NREB as a member of the RE developers, and we have proposed, and NREB has accepted, that there should be a differentiated fit for waste to energy, differentiated from the biomass. Right now, if you're a waste to energy power plant, you get the biomass fit, 663. But with that differentiated fit, you can get the new feed-in tariff, which we are working on. So for all of the developers out there, we would need information to support a differentiated fit for waste to energy.
And that's what they do in Thailand. Thailand actually has a specific MSW tariff. Biomass is different. And I think this ties together what Aaron started out with and what you said before, which was The real change, if you look at it right now for biomass, is the improvement in the technology and really moving away from simple shaking grate and just, again, straight burn technologies that toss a fair bit into the air, that toss a fair bit into the water. New technologies that allow for that to be controlled, allow for it to be taken out and utilized in other fashions. One of the problems you run into with biomass is a lot of the organics within it are hydrocarbons. As you move it down the chain, you break those hydrocarbons down. In some cases, you get something like coal, which burns out nice and relatively cleanly. In some cases, you get tars, which is this gummy kind of stuff that racks up every machine that you put it into. Technology has moved along to deal with these, and the problem that you run into is technology doesn't come cheap. If you basically want to move ahead and you want to start, again, having a more complete development, having projects that are using more advanced technologies, you're going to have to accept that the guy who spent the money to develop that is going to want to make that money back. It's not brain surgery, it's not a surprise. But the new technologies that are out there are very much changing the way biomass and waste energy can be used to generate electricity. Ruth's comment, which I turn to my colleague here because I really just have I'm 52, but sometimes I'm still 17, is when I heard, it's such a waste of waste.
Waste, yeah, waste.
And then Aaron said, and that's a waste.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're 17-year-olds who are still a little bit, we've gotten older and grayer. But it is true. At this point in time, you've got a Solid Waste Management Act that requires every LGU to have a disposal plan that includes a sanitary landfill or something akin thereto. And you got one fully permitted sanitary landfill in the country. You got a couple of others that are kind of sanitary landfills that are basically no longer landfills. Because a landfill usually means that, there's still like a hole in the ground. The holes are gone, they're now mountains. If y'all got snow, we could turn them into ski areas, okay? And they're just getting bigger. I mean, you look at what, Smoky Mountain was filled, it was closed. That garbage from the city of Manila is being put onto barges and sent over to Navotas. And it's being dumped there, and Navotas is having a tough time taking care of it. Payatas is closed. Well, for anybody who doesn't go past there and actually sees at the end of the day, the trucks are still going in because there's no place else to put the waste. You've got a city here, and it's interesting. I was doing a little research on this a couple days ago. That is theoretically 11 million people. I'm sorry. If it's 14 million, if it's 10, and that's not going to get any smaller. And there's no place to put the landfills inside the town. So what do you have to do? You have to move them further away. You have to truck the waste further on. Waste is wet. It's heavy. It costs you money to move it. So a waste-to-energy technology can do amazing things in terms of not just, the fact that, okay, we're going to make electricity out of this, but we're actually going to get rid of our system can get rid of 95% of the waste by weight. Now, a portion of that is moisture. No two ways about it. But, proverbial British term, bloody hell. You can take 1,000 tons of waste, and it's 50 tons at the end of the day. Come on. I mean, that's an opportunity that we can use to kind of close up the landfills, or at least limit the number of landfills that we need, the new ones. Not have it dumped into the river. So actually a graphic, and obviously my CEO would smack me upside the head for not having lots of slides to put up. But the Philippines is the third largest contributor after China and Indonesia to garbage going into the oceans. And that's not just for Asia, that's the entire world. Now, China's 1.3 billion, Indonesia's 260 million people. The Philippines is 100 million. And I mean, the numbers are not that far apart. So you just have vast amounts of waste that is going into your water supply. This is a nation where people eat fish like it's going out of style. Where do you think that garbage is going, and where do you think the fish are coming from? I haven't noticed it in the tuna coming from General Santos. I still have to say the tuna from Mindanao, Kinilau, always coming out very, very well. But this is your country. You've got an opportunity to take that waste, manage it, deal with it, turn it into something that you can use. And it just seems to be that people like, I like the idea. And I have to say, I get approached far more by LGUs on a waste management basis than anything else. LGUs are saying, you can do this for me? No problem. I can give you a contract. You start doing this. So it's not the power side. So the LGUs see it. But in some ways, when they see the price tag, that's where it gets a little bit iffy. No one wants to pay tipping fees. And the last piece to this is, the government cannot legitimately smack the knuckles of every LGU when you only have one sanitary landfill. But if you give the government other opportunities to say, sanitary landfill or this, then you can start putting the squeeze on the LGUs to actually perform. And the number of LGUs that are, to my knowledge, that are performing in accordance with the law is less than 10% of the Republic of the Philippine Islands. That's scary. I'm going to shut up now.
And which landfill is that? Where is that located? Metro Clark.
Clark itself, and a lot of people don't realize this, is half the size of Singapore, right? It is a huge area, right? And so when I bring investors in and look at Clark for various reasons, and what they're like in shock, right? So you want to talk about a huge resource. Now that landfill is massive. You've got Smoky Mountain, you've got various sites around the country. But to talk about the cost, I think that's that's always the sticking point with any new technology, right? People say, well, look, if I can generate a megawatt with coal at X price, right? Okay, well, we're not. I think that's really, the wrong approach, right? You're trying to sell this technology, right? I mean, I think if you're selling it, and you're competing with coal, or you're competing with, cheap LNG, or forget it, right? You're not going to win at the beginning. I think it needs to be a holistic solution, right? You've got to talk about, a multifaceted problem, and what is the value in, getting rid of your waste, right? What's the value in addressing that issue? Shrinking it down, right? The tonnage, say, from 1,000 to 50, or right, by removing all of the excess moisture, which then can be, some of these technologies like ours, can produce, distilled clean water that people can use for farming or whatever, right? So, I think if you look at the whole picture, it starts to come together. The question is, and I think Bert, you pointed out, this is also portable technology, right? So people also have to look at it and say, well, geez, I could take one of these things like a diesel genset, and I could plop it down anywhere. So we talked about one of the earlier panels this morning. They had some nice slides on Ondoy and Yolanda, and the massive super typhoons that have been happening. Seems like every other year now. 100-year storms that are coming every 10 years or every other year. What if we were to put one of these down in Visayas, right after a typhoon, right? The biggest problem when I was involved in the aid efforts was, they needed chainsaws just to chop up garbage and all the debris, right? Then the question is, what do you do with all the debris, right? Well, it ends up in the waterways, right? Or it ends up just sitting there and festering and causing, infection, disease, whatnot, right? So, geez, if you could feed that stuff into a waste-to-energy unit, generate power on-site, syngas, smack a GE engine onto it, and then you've got electricity, right? I mean, it's really that easy. The question is changing minds, right? People kind of still think in terms of diesel gensets, right? And it's kind of, presenting the business case and the public policy case for, solving more than just the energy problem. You're solving a debris problem. You're solving a waste problem. You know, in Hong Kong, and Ed and I spent a fair amount of time in Hong Kong. I mean, you know, power is just so ridiculously cheap, right? And they've got subsidies on top of it as well. You know, I got my electricity bill last week, and I was like, I can't believe this. I'm still getting a subsidy, and it's already so cheap, right? Because they've got the Daya Bay nuclear plant and, you know, cheap coal plants and whatnot. Well, that's why Hong Kong won't do a waste-to-energy project, right? They're doing incineration. Why? Well, you know what? Their power's already so cheap. They don't care. They're just kind of looking at it in terms of, well, here's what I pay for a kilowatt hour, and, you know, and that's it, right? Well, and what do you do with the garbage? Well, we'll burn it or we'll bury it. Until now, they didn't have a problem with the burial, right? Right, but now they're talking, okay, we're running out of space and starting to carve out some of the country parks. Well, when you're starting to carve out, you know, additional land in public lands, right? You know, forest lands, and you're starting to use it to bury garbage. Well, you got to start asking yourself a question, right? Right? Is that really wise, right? So, I think on a, you know, maybe we could turn to Ruth in a public policy perspective, maybe from the multilaterals perspective. You know, what are the arguments that work? When you're talking to governments in the region, or you're talking to, say, LGUs here in the Philippines. What are the arguments that work?
Okay, that's what I'm about to tell here. The number one step to do is not with the DOE. It should be with the DNR. There must be amendment of the Ecological Waste Management Act that will provide framework for waste to energy or waste processing. That's the first step. That's the only then you can go to the DOE that we will also amend the RE law. Because, okay, actually there are three drivers on waste to energy in the Philippines. Number one is security of feedstock. Number two is what is the business model, because who controls the feedstock? Of course, it's the local government unit. Under the law, it's the local government unit who has the control of disposal, collection, and generation. And the national government is just a policy-making organization. So if the mayor controls the feedstock and he has only 3 years, how would how could you have a very secured feedstock for 25 years? Any investor doesn't want a 3-year contract. Every investor would want a 25-year feedstock agreement with the LGU. So, and every LGU does not have so much waste. So you have to cluster the towns and cities. So, so one province depends upon the population of the province. So if you have about 1 million people in that province generating about 1,000 tons a day, you have already about 20 megawatt of energy from waste. Now, with the secured energy, how would you, with secured feedstock, how would you now convince that the technology that you are going to use is proven? And how is that technology acceptable to the stakeholders, to the environment, to the people in the community? Is that technology acceptable also to the investors? And also, how many facilities runs that technology? How many, in order that the DOE would approve the operating contract? So according to NEDA, there should be five facilities operating in 5 years, selling already to the grid. For your information, we at NEDA are now working on a 179 LGUs. We are now conducting a PCB study, Metro Manila, towns and cities, and nearby provinces. The PCB study is being funded by NEDA. So after 8 months, we will review that, and then we will do a public-private partnership scheme of development of the waste-to-energy process. But then, now the problem with the NEDA group is that there's not much technology proven and available for the project. Because we need technologies that will not be attacked. Petition is stopped by environmental group. This is really the findings of the initial findings of the PCB study. So if we are going to push on with the energy from waste project of about 50,000 tons a day, that is the target of the 179 LGUs. We will be under the PPP program. Then we will be amending the Ecological Waste Management Act. Then we'll go to the RE to amend also to redefine the feedstock.
I'd like to interject. At the NREB, we're already discussing the waste to energy guidelines upon the initiative of the DENR representative. So we're moving ahead without any of those changes in the law, Ruth, which I'm proud to report.
Thank you. I know
So
that.
we're doing that, and as I said earlier, we are also looking to have a differentiated feed-in tariff for waste to energy, which hopefully will address that holistic approach that you had described earlier, Andrew. I was hoping that more cognizance of the very positive impact on cleaning or finding a solution to the sanitary landfill situation that we have would be taken into consideration. So it's not just an energy project that competes with coal or whatever the avoided cost in the grid is. It is an energy project that addresses, at the same breath, the environmental issues that we haven't found a solution for. So I think that we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel on waste to energy. I think that, for example, if someone were to move forward right now, submit a waste to energy project with the DOE, then it'll probably be treated more fairly than it was before, given the progress in the guidelines, the thinking of the NREB, and the view that we really want to develop this by having a differentiated fit for waste to energy.
Do you think that the fit is being, shall we say, adversely impacted by the fact that I can go today and sign up a contract with SMEC for 40 megawatts worth of coal-fired power for 3.9, 3.4 peso? Even when I take into account all the other stuff that gets tossed on top of it, I'm still looking at 4 peso as a base. And so if we're saying that's always the problem with feed-in tariffs. And I have to admit that, I've always sort of been skeptical of them because they're not doing kind of what they were supposed to do. The whole idea was they were supposed to be little bitty guys who sold a little bit extra to the grid. And we've changed from, it was a one come, one all. If you have power from this, I'll buy it. Here's your money, go away. And it's sort of moved into this whole universe of being utility scale, but at essentially what's a subsidized rate. And I always wonder when I watch, I'm all for pushing advanced conversion technologies. And I include within that solar because it is. I mean, it's an advanced conversion technology. Waste energy clearly is. And moving a lot of these advanced technologies into the world where they're picking up biomass and taking biomass away from a situation where you're burning it in the street kind of thing. Or sorry, burning in the fields. Yeah. If your biomass is in the street, you've got a problem. But that is always, I see it daily when I'm negotiating, which is, but coal is so cheap. It won't be for that much longer, but when you're talking to the guy who's got to take the money out of his pocket. So that becomes the same question at the governmental level as if we start tacking on an even higher premium, is that going to, look at what happened with solar when the solar fit came out. People were screaming and yelling, oh my God, this number is so high, it's so crazy, it's so high. And that held up the issuance of that feed-in tariff for at least 2 years. So it's just I'd like to see it, but it would just be a question for you is, are we asking for trouble there at this point?
Yeah. You asked probably my favorite question of the day, Ed, because I'm of the view, thank you. I'm of the view that you don't really compete with coal. It's a merit order thing. And I'm sure you're aware of this. I'm sure that the utility guys here are aware of this. The ordinary consumer isn't. You do not compete with coal. You compete at the margin with whatever is the marginal plant. The marginal plant in Luzon can be an expensive diesel power plant, or it can be a gas-fired plant. So really, at the NREB, what we're doing is, for the first time, and just to prove to you, I was there earlier. I wanted to make a comment when somebody said only 1 or 2 have been paid their feed-in tariffs. Well, there are actually more now, maybe around 10. Not enough, really, to make us all jump for joy. But it has taken so long. It has taken so long, but the process has been completed recently. And what you're seeing is a lot will go down that road now. And now at NREB, what we want to do is, why don't we monitor the uptake on the feed-in tariff allowance? Because every hour you compare what you pay for the feed-in tariff and what you have reduced the feed-in tariff. You see, actually, Western prices get reduced by the amount of renewable energy priority dispatch, essentially at zero cost. You, in effect, move that merit order stack rightward and reduce the cost of power. Why don't we calculate that at NREB and explain that to the ordinary consumer? Why the feed-in tariff doesn't really cost that much? Well, because we remain a very expensive grid. We've got unreliability in our lines, in our power supply, tight supply, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, if you look at the last year, the average price in the WESM during the top half is probably 6 pesos per kilowatt. The result is 6 pesos per kilowatt hour. It's not the 3.90 or 4 that you can buy from SMEC. It is 6 pesos per kilowatt hour. But you see, everyone wants to compare renewables with the cheapest cost power out there. Unfair. Unfair. I think a proper economic analysis has to be done. We will do that. We'll distill it and explain it to the ordinary consumer. That's our dream at NREB, to explain to them, well, the feed-in tariff really encourages a more diversified portfolio in your grid. And what it does is, yes, it will increase the cost. Yes, it will bring in new investments, new players, new areas of the country will be developed. Remember, if I buy from SMEC, I don't pay the guy that gives me the feedstock. Yeah? Out of my 663, that's probably 250 that I pay to the feedstock provider. That doesn't happen to a coal-fired power plant situation. I just pay the guy from Australia or from Indonesia. So that doesn't get captured. But because we have the FIT, that gets encouraged. So, you know, a lot of things going on here. It's hard to explain, but I hope that the more we talk about this issue, the more we increase awareness, the more people will get to understand that, you know, 4 centavos per kilowatt hour, I can afford that.
Well, and that's where we have to get to. And I know that we're out of time here. I just want to close with one thing, which is I've heard your dream. Now I've heard your dream. I won't share my dreams because it's still, you know, children are still awake. But Ruth, just to close out, what's your dream, since you've been in the policy area, what's your dream to see how biomass and waste to energy can really become something that is meaningful here in the Philippines?
I'm looking at a very viable waste energy from waste. Actually, we call it material recovery and energy facility. And we are not only talking about selling of electricity as a revenue. If you do MREF or energy from waste, you have money at the gate, definitely. You have also end products. You can also sell carbon credit on the world market because you are reducing greenhouse gas emission. So we calculate the business model. We are not only selling electricity, Bert, even though we are not concerned so much on the feed-in tariff, but right there at the gate, we are already earning money. Yeah, what's my dream? Zero waste Philippines.
Good dream. I'd like to see Smoky Mountain gone. All those kids in a free school, right, with free energy. Right? that's a dream we should all be aspiring to. So, thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience. Anyone wants to linger, chat? I mean, I'm available. I think, you know, I love talking about this. I get very passionate about it because it's, you know, it's not just, you know, we're not just making money here. We're you know, we're doing well by doing good as well, right? So I think that's, you know, that's kind of a really nice thing about this particular space in the energy industry. Good. All right. Thank you.